So I'm going to record this, if that's okay. But anyways, there I am, Steve Weiser. I'm a local historian. I've given several talks here in the past. So hopefully you have attended some of those. Today we're going to be talking about notable women of Louisville.
Yay!
Yay! Women who have made Louisville a great place in which to live. So who is a notable woman of Louisville? This is my own list. You may have a different list. And at the end of this presentation, if there's someone that I did not mention that you would like to suggest to mention, then we can do that. As far as what is a notable woman of Louisville, it's pretty much everything that you see there, whether they're famous or distinguished, accomplished, living, deceased. So I try to include a broad range of famous or infamous or whatever women in Louisville. Let's start out with the happy birthday women, the Hill sisters, who wrote the happy birthday song. There you go, that's them. Patty Hill and Mildred Hill, they were sisters. Mildred, born there on June 27th, 1859. And Patty was born on March 27th, 1868. So Patty was 9 years younger than Mildred. And Patty was the kindergarten teacher, or as I've been reprimanded to say, she was an early childhood educator. And then Mildred was the musician of the family. And between Mildred and Patty, they wrote a lot of early childhood educator songs. One of them was called Morning to You, or Good Morning to You. And they adapted that to Happy Birthday to You. So here's a historic marker that was put up for them and talks about it. It was back in 1893. Well, 133 years ago that they first sang the song. It's one of the most popular songs in the English language. In fact, it's been adapted to over 100 different languages around the world. It was first sung here near the Little Loom House on Kenwood Hill Drive in South Louisville, near Iroquois Park, if you're familiar with that section of Louisville. Now, one interesting thing about the Hill sisters, they're buried in Cave Hill Cemetery, but if you were to go there, you would not know when to sing the happy birthday song to them, because their headstone does not have their birth date listed on it. It has their birth year, but not their birth month or birth day. So I thought that was kind of ironic that here they are known for happy birthday to you, and then you can't sing happy birthday on their date if you don't know exactly when it was, because it's not there on the headstone. By the way, I've heard the happy birthday song sung in Italian when I was in Rome, Italy a few years ago. And just last year I was in Hawaii and they did a hula to happy birthday. So everyone does happy birthday. Does anyone here today have a birthday today?
No.
Okay, well, we're not going to sing it today, but anyways. So here's the song itself. It used to be copyrighted. You may know that if you had gone to a restaurant, they would sing a version of the song, but not the exact song. But back in, 2015, they got rid of the copyright, and now you can sing it without having a lawsuit filed against you. There's one other Hill sister, Mary Hill, and the school at 6th in Kentucky used to be called the Mary D. Hill School. It's now part of Simmons College, but if you ever heard of the Mary D. Hill School, it was connected to Patty and Mildred Hill. Enid Yandell, very famous sculptress of Louisville. She was born here, I think it was 1869, and she did not only statues here in Louisville, but around the country. She did artwork up in the Chicago World's Fair in 1893. She studied with Auguste Rodin over in Paris, France. She had her own New York City studio, art studio. there's a historic marker that talks about Enid Yandell's life. And that is her burial spot there at Cave Hill. It's one of the most scenic locations in the cemetery. It overlooks the lake and with the administration building in the far distant there. One more thing I do want to talk about Enid Yandell. Two of her sculptures here in Louisville are the Hogan's Fountain, which is at the pinnacle of Cherokee Park, and the Daniel Boone statue, also at Cherokee Park. So those are her two famous statues here, but she's done a number of other statues here around the area. So Enid Yandell, very famous sculptor of Louisville. Next I want to talk about Catherine Spaulding. She was a Catholic nun, and she helped form the Sisters of Charity of Nazareth out near Bardstown, Kentucky. Of course, Spaulding University is named for her. She helped start Presentation Academy in downtown Louisville, and a variety of other schools, Catholic institutions throughout the area. Here is a sculpture of her down in front of the Cathedral of the Assumption. And this is her gravesite out at Nazareth, Kentucky, which is near Bardstown, where she is buried. Alice Virginia Coffin. I do not know much about Alice Virginia Coffin. She was born here, I think she was only 1 year old when the family moved to Salem, Indiana. And she ended up being a teacher in Iowa. And through her efforts, a private philanthropic organization was formed which helps give scholarships to women to go to college. It's called the Philanthropic Educational Organization, PEO, founded in 1869, and they have given women millions of dollars to go to college. So very important person. She was born here down on East Jefferson Street near Floyd, but again only lived here about a year before they moved to Indiana and then on to Iowa. Eliza Tevis, one of the heroes that I'm aware of as far as women are concerned in Louisville. She was an African-American slave when she was born here back in the early 1800s. We really don't know her birth year. It was either 1802, 1804, somewhere in that neighborhood. She was an African-American slave, and she was able to earn her freedom, and I don't know the whole story. You can probably Google it to find out more about it, but she was able to get her freedom and then begin to earn some wealth, get some money, and she eventually helped buy some land in what's now called the Newburgh section of Louisville. And then she would help buy slaves and give them their freedom. So she was able to earn money, buy slaves who were enslaved, and then give them their freedom through her efforts. And so this was back during the 1800s, obviously before 1865. She lived up into the 1880s. Again, we do not know her exact date of death. But anyway, she was a pioneering African American back in the days when it was difficult to do that, being a slave and all that she had to go through. So very fascinating woman back in the 1800s, Eliza Tevis. Irene Dunn, very famous film actress from Louisville. She only lived here about, I want to say about 12 years before her family. I think they ended up moving to Madison, Indiana. And she's usually referred to as the most famous actress that never has won an Academy Award. Here are some of the movies that she was in. Of course, with Cary Grant and all the leading men of Hollywood she appeared in movies with. Here, during World War II, she came to Louisville on a fundraising trip. There she is getting off the plane at Bowman Field. There was a historic marker in downtown Louisville for her, but we've since relocated that down near the wharf, near the Ohio River. Mary Anderson, another very famous actress from Louisville. She started her acting career here locally at a theater, Macaulay's Theater, back in 1875. And then she appeared in various theater plays throughout the country. And then she ended up over in England. And that's where she spent most of her life. I believe she's buried over in London, England as well. But Mary Anderson, we still remember her today via that one theater that was in downtown called the Mary Anderson Theater. But during her time, she was one of the most popular actresses in America and England. We also remember her as part of the famous Louisville clock. She's depicted there in the grandstand observing the race of the clock, if y'all remember the Louisville clock. Sean Young. I do not know much about Sean Young. She was also a female actress, very popular in Hollywood during the 1980s. Appeared in a variety of movies there. One of them was Stripes, which was actually filmed here in Louisville. But she was in a variety of movies during the 1980s. Not sure what she's done since then, but again, born here in Louisville in 1959. Mary Millicent Miller. She was a steamboat captain back, I think it was 1884, 1884 when she became a steamboat captain. One of the first female steamboat captains of the day back in the late 1800s. And we remember her to this day by another boat that's on the Ohio River called the Mary M. Miller. It's a small little cruise boat down next to the Belle of Louisville. And you see it cruising up and down the Ohio River. But Mary M. Miller, steamboat captain, back in the day when females were not allowed too much to pilot a steamboat. Of course, we have the Belle of Louisville, another reference to women. It's named the Belle. And there's the Belle of Louisville on the Louisville clock, which was kind of a risque sort of a sculpture there that Barney Bright did. But anyways, the Belle of Louisville, the famous one. Sally Ward. Not certain if you've ever heard of Sally Ward or not. She was a very famous socialite back in the mid-1800s. I equate her to the Paris Hilton or Kim Kardashian. I'm not sure how much you keep up with these socialite women and their fashion and all. But Sally Ward was extremely notable back in the mid-1800s. It wasn't a party unless Sally Ward was there. She was the it girl here in Louisville back in the mid-1800s. She not only was fashionable, but she was very controversial. She would wear her bloomers, which were her undergarments, out in public. Very scandalous for the era, as you could say. And another scandalous thing that she did, she was married 4 times. Nowadays, that's kind of, it's not so scandalous, but back in the 1800s, being married 4 times, especially when some of your husbands were still alive when you married your next husband. She would marry one guy, didn't like him so much, so she would go marry another guy. So Sally Ward, and she was the original Belle of Louisville as such. But anyways, very fashionable, very controversial, Sally Ward. That's her gravesite in Cave Hill Cemetery. And one of the newspaper reporters of the day noted when she was buried that now Sally Ward sleeps alone. Yeah, very kind of controversial, scandalous life that she lived. Fanny Speed, she was married to Joshua Fry Speed. They were good friends with Abraham Lincoln, President Lincoln. In fact, Lincoln stayed at their house, Farmington, which is a historic house here in Louisville. But Fanny Speed, married to Joshua there. Beachland, the daughter of Zachary Taylor was known as Sarah Knox Taylor. Sarah Knox Taylor married a soldier by the name of Jefferson Davis, who would go on to be president of the Confederacy. Sarah Knox Taylor was the daughter of President Zachary Taylor. And unfortunately, on their honeymoon, Sarah Knox Taylor contracted malaria down in Louisiana and died on their honeymoon. So kind of a sad tale of her back in 1835. And of course, Jefferson Davis would go on to remarry and become president of the Confederacy. Talking also about the Civil War, Elizabeth Timms. She was the only woman buried in the Confederate plot in Cave Hill Cemetery. In Cave Hill, there are over 200 Confederate soldiers buried at Cave Hill. All of them died at the prison here in Louisville, down near 10th and Broadway. There was a prison where they housed all the Confederate prisoners, and one of them was Elizabeth Timms. How Elizabeth got there was kind of interesting. So when General William Sherman was doing his march to the sea down to Atlanta, when he burned Atlanta and went over to Savannah and all that, as he was heading to Atlanta, he went through Calhoun, Georgia, which is just north of Atlanta. And Elizabeth Timms owned a farm there, and she helped some of the Confederate soldiers on her farm escape from Sherman's troops. Well, Sherman did not like that very much, and so he ordered Elizabeth Timms to be captured and brought up to the prison here in Louisville to make an example of her for disobeying orders and allowing the Confederates to escape. Unfortunately, Elizabeth Timms died of an illness here at the Louisville prison, and she was buried with the other Confederate soldiers there at Cave Hill Cemetery. The newspaper article that you see there is kind of tragic in the fact that her husband came back from the Civil War to their farm and found out his wife was no longer there. In fact, he didn't know what had happened to Elizabeth till about 1887, when this article appeared and talked about her being buried in Cave Hill Cemetery. So that's when her husband found out what had happened to his wife in the Civil War. Kind of a tragic tale, but she's buried there at Cave Hill. And you see that new marker that we have up there for her. Most of the Confederate markers have weathered off, but a number of years ago, a number of us got together and paid for her to have a new nice marker there in the Confederate plot. Okay. I just mentioned to you about Sarah Knox Taylor, who was the daughter of Zachary Taylor, and who was the wife of Zachary Taylor, who was the First Lady of the United States in relationship to President Zachary Taylor. Does anyone know who that is? Her name was Margaret Peggy Taylor, and she was the First Lady to President Zachary Taylor. And she's buried here in Zachary Taylor National Cemetery, just right down the road from where we're sitting here today. Most people do not know that we have a First Lady of the United States buried here in Louisville. Let me go back to that. By the way, 4 of their 6 children were born here in Louisville, so most of them were born here. And again, their house was just across the interstate from where we're seated here today, the Zachary Taylor house. Peggy Chenoweth and the massacre by the Indians. Back in the late 1700s, it was unfortunate but a normal occurrence that Indians would attack the white settlers, the European settlers. For whatever reason, they didn't like us moving in on their property here, and so there was a lot of conflicts between Europeans and the Native Americans. And Peggy Chenoweth was one of those. She was part of a homestead out near Middletown, Kentucky, that was attacked. The Indians actually scalped her. They thought they had killed her, and she did live. She wore a wig for the remainder of her life. I think she lived up into her 80s, age 80, but she did survive the attack. Peggy Chenoweth. Rosa Phillips Stonestreet. She was the first female superintendent of the Louisville, Jefferson County school system. So, and that was back in the early 1900s. I think it was 1890, when was it, 1897 through 1909, somewhere in that neighborhood. She was the first female superintendent of the school system here. And there's a elementary school out on Stone Street Road where her farm and house was dedicated to her. She was a very important lady back in the early 1900s. She was very strict, very good disciplinarian, and all. This is her gravesite here in Cave Hill Cemetery. Unfortunately, her gravesite does not have a headstone on it. So she's buried there in an unmarked grave in Cave Hill. Her husband has a headstone. What happened was they did have a son, but unfortunately he died before she died. So when Rosa Stone Street died, there's no one there to pay for a headstone for her there at Cave Hill. And hopefully it's on my bucket list things to do to get a headstone for Rosa Stone Street before I depart my existence here. But anyways, Rosa Stone Street. Now then, the second female superintendent was Donna Hargens, and she was superintendent just a few years ago, 2011, 2017. So for the past 100 or more years, there have only been 2 female superintendents of the local school system. As you may know, they're currently going through a selection process for a new superintendent, and both of the candidates are men. So we won't have a female superintendent coming up either. But anyways, Donna Hargens and Rosa Stone Street, the only 2 female superintendents in Jefferson County Schools. The Caldwell sisters, pretty famous folks. Mary Elizabeth Caldwell and Mary Gwendolyn Caldwell, they were sisters. They were born in Louisville, but they really spent most of their lives in Cincinnati, New York, and over in Europe. They really didn't live here that much. They inherited their father's fortune. He made a lot of money through the natural gas companies that he owned. Here is a little genealogy chart that I did for the Caldwell sisters, talking about their descendancy from John Floyd to James Breckinridge to William Shakespeare Caldwell. So anyways, the Caldwells inherited a lot of money, and they owned a lot of property here and around Louisville. They owned all the land that is where Bowman Field is today, and you can see where kind of their house was. It was located there off Pee Wee Reese Lane near present-day Bowman Field. They owned a lot of the land in Shelby Park neighborhood, which is in the inner city of Louisville. So both the St. Matthews area there around Bowman Field and then the Shelby Park neighborhood near downtown, they owned land. So they owned a lot of land here in Louisville, and that's the reason why they were tied to Louisville and the reason why they were buried back here. They were both baronesses, by the way. They both married European royalty. So they were baronesses, and they lived a life of luxury over there in Europe. One of them helped fund Caldwell Hall there at Catholic University. St. Mary's and Elizabeth Hospital was funded by the Caldwell family, so they left a lot of good institutions here. Alice Caldwell Hegan Rice, she was a female author, and one of her more famous books was Mrs. Wings of Cabbage Patch, which you see there. A lot of people may be familiar with that book. W.C. Fields made a movie based on it. She lived on St. James Court. She wrote over 20 books as such. Bertha Matilde Honoree Palmer. Most of you have never heard of her. Has anyone been to Chicago and heard of the Palmer House? Well, if you've ever heard of the Palmer House, she was married to what was his name? Potter Palmer. Potter Palmer. She was married to Potter Palmer. So very wealthy lady. She headed up the Chicago World's Fair and helped coordinate a lot of things that went on with the Chicago World's Fair. And that's one reason why Enid Yandell, who I mentioned earlier, was able to do some of the statuary up there at that famous fair. But she was very very wealthy and did a lot of great things for the city of Chicago. But again, she was born here in Louisville and then they ended up in Chicago. Bertha Palmer. Jenny Benedict. A lot of you probably still do some Benedictine. Everyone heard of Benedictine? It's a cucumber spread.
Yes.
Okay, excellent, thank you. She actually also owned a restaurant in downtown Louisville. There's a historic marker downtown that talks about Jenny Benedict. There's some of the Benedictine that she helped create, and there's an image of her there in the lower right-hand corner. I've never had Benedictine, believe it or not. I've never been around it. I know everyone's shocked by that. But yeah. And this is her house. She lived down near Millwood Avenue and Edith Lane, I-71. Down in the Butchertown area is where she lived. Her house is still there. This is her grave site in Cave Hill Cemetery. She died in 1928, almost 100 years ago. So wow, you know, for Benedictine to keep lasting ever since then. Isabel Muth. I do not know much about Isabel Muth, but she did own a candy store in downtown Louisville called Muth's Candy. I take it some of y'all have had Muth's Candy, but that's some images of her. I don't know much more about her. I should. Lou Tate Bowsman. She was a textile weaver, created a lot of her textiles up at the little loom house there that I mentioned earlier, where the Hill sisters did their birthday party. But Lou Tate, I call her Lou Tate primarily, she was very famous textile weaver. Eleanor Roosevelt, the wife of the president, liked all of her work, had her up to the White House. In fact, Eleanor Roosevelt came here to Louisville to meet Lou Tate, and so they were very close friends. But Lou Tate, very famous weaver of Louisville, and the little loom house is sort of like a little museum dedicated to her. It's up there on Kenwood Hill Drive. Harriet Teresa Hattie Bishop Speed. It's kind of a mouthful, isn't it? But Hattie Speed, as she was known, again, very wealthy. She was married to James Breckinridge Speed, one of the descendants of the Speed family, Farmington and all that. They own this really beautiful mansion in Old Louisville on Ormsby. I think it's at 5th and Ormsby, somewhere in that neighborhood. She had this big music room on the back of that house, and she would have concerts there, have various performers do both musical and performing arts type of concerts for her. And when her husband, James Breckinridge Speed, passed away, she donated money to create the J.B. Speed Art Museum that you see there in the lower left-hand corner. So here's some more images of the Speed Mansion there in Old Louisville. Susan Howells Look Avery. Most of you may not have heard of Susan Avery, but she helped fund Susan B. Anthony's women's suffrage movement, the women's right to vote. Susan was married to Benjamin Avery, who was very wealthy Louisvillian. In fact, in today's monetary terms, he would probably have been a billionaire. He owned an agricultural company here in Louisville that sold agricultural equipment across the country. And Susan, his wife, was very active in the women's suffrage movement and donated a lot of money to Susan B. Anthony. There's some of the images of women's right to vote. That was back in the, I think the right to vote, correct me if I'm wrong, was around 1920, 1922 or so. Unfortunately, Susan did not live to see the right to vote. She passed away in 1916. So here are some more images of the women's voting organizations. Louise Leland and Ann Bruce Halderman. Louise Leland was the first registered architect in the state of Kentucky. I am an architect, but Louise was the first female architect here in Louisville. She mainly did the residential designs. I'm not aware of any commercial structures that she did. She was partnered with Ann Bruce Haldren. Ann was a landscape designer, did a lot of gardens, so Louise would design the houses, Ann would do the landscape around the houses and all. She passed away in 1956, and unfortunately she's not buried here in Louisville. She's buried over in Illinois, where she is from. Henrietta Miller Bingham. She's one of the Bingham family. You're probably familiar with the Binghams. They once owned the Courier Journal, WHAS TV, WHAS Radio, various other enterprises, media. And Henrietta was sort of the wild child of the Binghams back in the early 1900s, somewhat very similar to Sally Ward, if you will. Again, she was a socialite, but she did things that were unconventional for women to do back in the early 1900s. You can only imagine riding horses and things of this nature that she was involved with. One of her descendants, Emily Bingham, who's pictured there, wrote a book on her called Irrepressible. And if you really want to read a nice book, I highly recommend this book. I've read it. Very fascinating story of Henrietta's life. She had a full life. Murray Atkins Walls, civil rights pioneer. Murray Atkins Walls does not get a lot of publicity here. There are a lot of other, like Martin Luther King or some of the other civil rights activists. But Murray here helped desegregate the local Girl Scout organization back in the 1950s. And she also helped desegregate the public library system. So she was a civil rights activist. A number of years ago, they put up a historical marker near the Girl Scout headquarters on Lexington Road to commemorate her desegregation of that organization. And then after that, I get a call from the historic people saying, "Hey Steve, we have an extra historic sign for her as well, and we would like to install in Louisville. Where can we put that at?" Obviously, the natural location would be in front of the library where she helped desegregate it, right? Well, you probably have never put up a historic marker, but there's a lot of hoops and obstacles you have to go through to get permission to put up a historic sign. And I said, gosh, trying to put up a sign there in front of the library system, I can only imagine the obstacles I'll have to do that. So I called up the historical people. I said, I marked the spot in front of the library. You just go out and install it at that point, which they did. They just went out and installed it. I didn't seek permission. And that sign has been there for at least the last 20 years. So we were able to get it installed. No one complained about it. No issues. It's better to ask forgiveness than permission, right? And that's sort of the way I went about that. But she deserved it, and we were able to get that historic marker up for her. Anne Braden, another civil rights pioneer. Some of you may be familiar, back in the 1950s, early 60s, before the Civil Rights Act, African Americans were not allowed to buy property in certain neighborhoods. Well, Anne Braden helped an African American couple buy a house in the Shively neighborhood, and that caused all sorts of friction and conflict in the Shively area. Numerous bad things happened. But anyways, Anne Braden and her husband were civil rights activists, and some of you may be familiar with them. But anyways, wanted to highlight her. Bertha Whitby. She was the first African American police officer locally. Back in 1922, she was the first African American black officer in the police department. They hired her primarily to deal with the African American prisoners in the police area. A lot of African American legislators that I illustrate here, some of the first women to do various things that they did. Lynn's Paradise Cafe. How many had breakfast at Lynn's Paradise Cafe back in the 1990s? I want to say is when she was primarily active there. Enjoyed Lynn's place. Lynn Winter was her name. I really miss that place. I enjoy going there with my family. Here's some of my family photographs. We had a fun time going to that location. I'm sure a lot of you did. Claudia Sanders, the wife of Colonel Sanders. She, and it's still existing out there off Shelbyville Road in Simpsonville, Kentucky. She has a restaurant there. She passed away a number of years ago, back in, I think in the 1990s, but married to the Colonel there. Addie Martin Jacob. She was the wife of Charles Jacob. Charles Jacob was mayor of Louisville. He was a very progressive mayor. He put up street lights, paved the streets, helped start the Olmsted Park system here in Louisville. So she was very supportive of his efforts. And at Cave Hill, most of the big monuments in Cave Hill Cemetery are dedicated to the men.
Yeah.
This is one of the few, if not the only, huge monument dedicated to the woman. That was dedicated to Addie, his wife, Charles Jacob's wife. So thought that was unusual, if you will. Not sure what she had on him at the time, but anyways, that's just a little side humor there. But yeah, most of the markers there are for the men, but fortunately Addie gets her due here with this marker. Some other famous statuary at Cave Hill Cemetery. In the upper left-hand corner, that is Smiling Jesus. That's the gravesite of Brittany Bevan. She was about 17 or so years old when she tragically died in a car accident on Lexington Road. She was the daughter of the former Governor Matt Bevan. Then in the lower left-hand corner there, that's Sandra Twist. She was a UK cheerleader, a model. She also unfortunately died in a car accident when she was 40 years old. And her husband created this beautiful statue of her, and it was designed by Barney Bright. Another Barney Bright statue is there in the lower right-hand corner. That's for Sarah Applegate. Don't know much about her. She was a young woman who tragically died at a young age. But I call that the dancing girl. I always get a smile when I go by Sarah Applegate's gravesite there in Cave Hill. It's such a joyous representative of life, and glad Barney created that for her memory. The satellite monument in Cave Hill is the most picturesque monument in the cemetery. It's also the largest gravesite in Cave Hill. It's 1/3 of an acre there in Cave Hill. So Preston Pope Satellite and Florence Satellite are buried there on that site. Preston Pope Satellite was Florence's second husband. Her first husband was a guy by the name of James Martin. Anyone know who James Martin was? Pretty generic name, right? Could be anyone. But you would know who his business partner was. His business partner was a guy by the name of John D. Rockefeller in Standard Oil. Kind of a wealthy guy, wouldn't you say? And James Martin was a business partner with John D. Rockefeller. Again, James Martin died in a tragic automobile accident up in New York City. And his widow, Florence, was comforted by the family physician. Who was the family physician? Preston Pope Satellite. And they lived happily ever after on James Martin's money. They traveled through Europe, collected a lot of tapestries, sculptures, things of this nature. They owned a big mansion down in Palm Beach, Florida. And then when Florence passed away, Preston had this Temple of Love made for her there in Cave Hill Cemetery. This Temple of Love is based on Marie Antoinette's Temple of Love in Paris, France, or Versailles, France. How do we say Versailles in Kentucky? Versailles, that is correct. So anyways, Florence Brokaw Satellite's gravesite there at Cave Hill. Some more photographs of it. It's a beautiful scenic monument. Hopefully some of you have seen it there. Rebecca Rosenthal Judah, she was a Jewish woman, led a lot of, she was a leader in the Jewish efforts here in Louisville. And you can read about some of the things that she did with the National Council of Jewish Women, and was a leader for a variety of things. Sister Emily Cooper, she helped support the Home of the Innocents, which is downtown in the Butchertown district of Louisville, or the Nulu area. And she's buried there with a lot of the infants who died early. So Sister Emily Cooper, she was a big supporter of orphans and babies and young adults who do not have parents. Mona Strader Bismarck. Do not know much about her, but she again was a very fashionable, elite woman up in New York City primarily. She also was a little bit scandalous. She was married 5 times, it says. Her husband back in the 1920s was known as the most handsomest man in the nation back in the 1920s. So, and she was named the best dressed woman in the world in 1933. So she's very well known. Salvador Dali, the famous artist, did a painting of her. Truman Capote depicted her in a movie. So a very elegant, famous woman, born here in Louisville, but did not reside here. Obviously, she moved away. So.
You don't have a picture of her husband?
Do not. Sorry about that. To compare and see how handsome he was. That's a good point. I need to add that. Thank you. That's a good point. Sarah Martin was a blues singer, African-American blues singer. More than 100 records. Helen Humes. She was also a very famous jazz singer from Louisville, African-American. Count Basie Orchestra she performed with. You name it, she was involved in it during the jazz age. So a very famous woman. Mary Alice Hill Hadley pottery. Hopefully you all have had some Hadley pottery. Some stoneware. Her company still exists. It keeps bordering on going out of business, but I think it's in safe hands currently and still in business. But Hadley Pottery. She actually started the pottery company in her garage when she lived off of St. James Court in Old Louisville. She started it as a very small business, and obviously it grew into a major one. Here are some famous media women who were in the media, newscasters. Melissa Swan. Some of y'all may remember some of these ladies. Julie Shaw, Phyllis Knight, Melissa Forsythe. I think of those ladies, Candace Cliff in the upper right-hand corner, she is still on TV with WDRB. And I talked to Rachel Platt a lot. She's now with the Fraser Historical Museum. Perhaps the most famous woman newscaster from Louisville, Dian Sawyer, born in 1945. So she's 80 years old this year. Can you believe that? Gosh, Dian Sawyer. She was an anchor there of CBS News for many years, and she went to Seneca High School. And I think her classmates were Jerry Abramson. I think Jerry Abramson was in her Seneca High School class, and also Wes Unseld, the famous basketball player at U of L, was in her class at Seneca High. The Barnstable twins, of course, we just had the Derby, and they had that famous party on Oaks Evening. They were right before the Derby. They were famous actresses. Heather French Henry, a U.S. Miss America. Now I don't know if she was actually from Louisville. Correct me if I'm wrong. She might be, but I know her and her husband, Dr. Henry, still live here. Steve Henry is his name. And they live in the Cherokee Triangle area. They have several daughters, I believe, 2 daughters, I want to say. But Heather French Henry, a famous Miss America of Louisville. Elaine Chow, she's married to Mitch McConnell, Senator Mitch McConnell. And she, during several presidential administrations, she was in the cabinet as transportation secretary, I think, several times. Tori Morgan McClure, she rowed across the Atlantic Ocean by herself. Yeah. Why, I don't know, but I'm glad she made it, glad she was safe, but I like to fly over the Atlantic nowadays. She has some interesting tales of what happened to her across that Atlantic Ocean. Of course, she went on to become president of Spalding University. Kazito Cookies, there she is depicted. You usually see her at sporting events, selling her cookies. My daughters who live elsewhere, but whenever they come into Louisville, they have to go and buy some of her cookies. They love it. And so she came to America in 1975 and has been very successful at her cookie business. Mary T. Maher, a famous Olympic swimmer from Louisville. She now lives in Atlanta with her husband, Mike Plant. And she won 3 gold medals at the 1984 Olympics. In fact, she should have won a lot more gold medals because she was in her prime during the 1980 Olympics. Unfortunately, President Carter boycotted the 1980 Olympics when they were in Russia, and so she did not get to swim in those Olympics. But if she had, she would have won a lot more Olympic gold, because that's when was her prime years. So by the time the Olympics came back around in 1984, which I think were in Los Angeles, she won 3 gold medals. And we have a natatorium named for her over in the Crescent Hill area of Louisville. Some other famous women of Louisville that were involved in the civic, arts, preservation, and environmental movement. You see them depicted there. I won't go into each one of them. If I pick out one, then I'll have to talk about each one of them. But all of these ladies that you see here, in fact, I have known most of them that are listed here in one capacity or another. They're all very dedicated, passionate women. There's a lot on preservation in the arts. Several women authors from Louisville, Sue Grafton and Marcia Norman. Not sure if you've written any or have read any of their books. I unfortunately have not. I've not read their books, but anyways, very famous authors. Lonnie Ali, who is married to Mohammed, of course. She is from Louisville as well, as was Mohammed. Lonnie went to Mercy High School here in Louisville and had always known Muhammad Ali. And Muhammad had been married at least once, maybe twice prior to marrying Lonnie, but Lonnie really came along at a crucial time in his life when he was having a lot of health issues, and she really was a good supporter and caregiver for him in the latter stages of his life. Jennifer Lawrence, another famous actress from Louisville. She, I think, has won an Academy Award and has been involved in numerous movies, famous movies. And there she is wearing her Louisville basketball shirt and giving us the Louisville sign. And there we go, notable women of Louisville. I hope we all enjoyed all that. Any comments on those, or any women that you think I should have included? God said so. I hope I covered a lot of ground there. I never added up. I wanted to add up how many women I included, but I want to say probably 50 to 75 women I've included there. A lot of famous, notable women. Now, one question I always like to do at the very end of this is do a little quiz. We'll see how close attention you paid to this.
Oh.
I know. I always see the grimaces on your face. But who is the First Lady of the United States buried here in Louisville?
Zachary.
Well, that's the president, Zachary Taylor. Who was his wife? Margaret Taylor. Y'all gotta remember Margaret Peggy Taylor. So I always like doing that as quiz because, she was the first lady of the United States, and she's buried here in Louisville. Now, she was originally from Maryland, but she's here, and most of her children were born here, and of course Zachary lived here as well. So anyways, trying to remember that. You can do that as a quiz to some of your friends. Who's the first lady of the United States buried here in Louisville? That help? Well, thank y'all very much.
Thank you.
Okay.